Once again, we're back on Lutherans Alive, and our special guest today is Bishop Kurt Kusserow. Thank you again, Bishop, for taking the time to be with us.
You're welcome.
And as we went to break, we were just getting ready to relate the experience of Christmas Eve, Orthodox Christmas Eve worship in Bethlehem. Please, by all means, share the story with us.
I will. It was January 6th, a Tuesday, the same day that I arrived at Tel Aviv airport that morning and made my way by bus with others to our hotel in Jerusalem. And that night, after dinner, boarded another bus, went through the checkpoint into Bethlehem, and then walked from there up to Manger Square. When we arrived at the church, there were hundreds of people gathered outside. It was about 11:30. And
would they have already been informed of your intention to worship there?
They were. And in fact, both our presiding bishop, Mark Hansen, and Bishop Munib Yunan were invited to be part of the procession at one point in the service. And that was a joyful thing to see them included in that way. I think a very unusual thing. Nevertheless, we were gathered with crowds of people waiting outside the door. Not knowing fully what was going on, I started talking with an Orthodox woman who told me that the people we heard singing Christmas carols were Ethiopians who had gathered, that there were also Russians and Nigerians and people from all around the world who were Orthodox Christians and other Christians there for that event. We didn't know at the time, but the door was already open, but getting into the church was difficult because the door is so small. Only one person at a time can go in, and each person has to bend way over and go through a very small door to come into the church. Once inside, it's an immense basilica with no pews, and hundreds of people standing inside.
Just an open space.
Just an open space. Stone floor, pillars, a building that is hundreds of years old, and we could hear in the background a liturgy being sung, but couldn't see anything that was happening. And so all around us, people were standing and talking with each other and walking about almost as though they were at a concert and the band hadn't come on stage yet.
Oh my.
After about a half an hour of that, I decided to go exploring. I found in what we would call the North Transept, a bishop leaning against his altar, preaching to his people, while at the same time the Ethiopians were singing their Christmas carols in another place, and at the same time another liturgy was happening underneath the chancel of the church.
Oh my.
It was the most curious thing. There was no bulletin, no order of liturgy. Finally, the procession began, and it took a full hour for the procession, with processional crosses and banners and clergy, to come out into the congregation and go back into the chancel 3 times, singing the whole time, stopping on occasion, and that's where our bishops, Hansen and Yunan, were involved in the procession.
Fascinating.
About an hour or so into the experience, many of the tourists began to leave, and the people who were left were Christians who were gathered there for worship. All the world was gathered there, in the place where our Lord was born, and around the saving gospel of his incarnation, which I believe is the greatest story of accompaniment, one who gave up everything to come and be with us, to whom he belongs.
It really is. Such a profound moment. And that was, I guess, the major image that appeared to me as you described.
Yes.
People from different cultures, different places around the world, the international nature, the pilgrimage that comprised finally that moment when it was taking place.
And in that moment, among all those hundreds of people who were, of course, strangers to each other, speaking different languages, there presided such a peace that is certainly not present in most of the West Bank and in Israel these days. I think it was significant that each of us had to go into that place, bending almost over double to come in. But in that place is a sign of hope and the kind of peace for which we prayed, and for which our trip, I think, was an agent and a sign, a prayer for peace.
And in that place, there wasn't necessarily a concern for safety because of where that specific place is located, or was that in your mind or in the minds of others who were with you?
Being in Bethlehem in the West Bank, there were, of course, checkpoints that we had to go through, and there were Palestinian police outside doing regular crowd control. But when we were there, once we were inside the building particularly, it didn't feel like any of that applied anymore, that it was the people of God gathered around that holy night, around the celebration of the one who is the peace of the earth.
I think it sounds like the kind of an experience that many American Christians might yearn to experience, to actually be at that place where God's gift literally made contact, so to speak, with our world, and that accompaniment that you so described
Absolutely.
so well actually began.
There's one other place too where we had a very profound worship experience while we were there, and that was at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is built over what is very likely the spot of Jesus' crucifixion and his burial, and then necessarily also the place of the resurrection.
Yes.
And we were privileged there to be allowed to use the Franciscans' chapel in this building. Now, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is a very large building with all kinds of different chapels and peoples gathered together in one place. We celebrated there the first ever Lutheran Eucharist in the Franciscan chapel of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. One of the most powerful times in that service is when we all sang together, Dona nobis pacem, give us peace, thinking not only for ourselves, but for the people that we were accompanying while we were there.
What was your sense from the native Palestinians to actually experience your presence as Lutheran Christians from the Western sphere, to come and join them, particularly at such a meaningful time of the Christian year, and to be there to celebrate such things? I'm sure there were probably numerous expressions of appreciation and of the meaningfulness of that gesture to be there.
There were, and particularly from the Lutherans, they took every opportunity to tell us how important it was for them, for us to be there with them in person. It's one thing to write messages or to pass resolutions, but to come and be in person meant all the world to them, because that act of accompaniment gave them hope and gave them peace in a time when they are feeling increasingly hopeless. Another thing that we experienced there from the people was that all they wanted to talk about was the wall and the situation in Gaza. For them, that's their whole life. And for us, reveling in those moments of being at the place of Jesus' birth and at the place of his resurrection, that was not their major concern. It was their life right now, and all the lack of peace that they have for those reasons.
What shape did that kind of conversation take?
One of the things we learned profoundly was the connection between our country and the events that are happening there. The folks who live there in Israel and in the West Bank are profoundly aware of how the actions of the United States make a huge difference in their lives. And so as Americans there, in conversation with them, they wanted to appeal to us for their well-being and ask us, can't you ask your country to be agents of peace for us?
It's a very important message, and certainly one we need to not only make clear, but hold out there for others to hear as well. We're at the point where we do need to take another short break before we come back for our final segment today.